parents, everyone, and said I was a mistake. But I found friends and graduated from university. Together, we formed a team and made a lot of money. But then, growing up, life wasn't what you'd call ideal. My parents, I don't think they ever really wanted kids. Maybe they thought having me would somehow fix their messed up marriage or give them something to focus on other than each other's hatred. But that didn't happen. Instead, I became the punching bag, emotionally, not physically, though sometimes I wish they'd hit me. At least then, I'd have had visible scars to show for it, something tangible. Instead, it was the words, the passive-aggressive digs, the blame. Everything I did was wrong, and nothing was ever enough. If I got an A in school, it should have been an A+. If I stayed out of trouble, I was too quiet or shady. They had a way of making me feel like just existing was a mistake. To be honest, I didn't really have anyone in my corner back then. I was lonely. I hated my parents, and I hated that I was stuck with them. The constant tension at home made me restless, and the only escape was school. Not that school was great either. I was one of those quiet kids, the ones who try to disappear into the background. I wasn't athletic or popular, but I wasn't a total outcast either. I just existed. That all changed in middle school when I met two people who'd end up changing the course of my entire life, Noah and James. We weren't the type to become instant friends. In fact, at first, we were just kids sitting in the same classroom, too shy or too disinterested to care about each other. But as the years passed, something clicked. Noah was the rebellious one. He had this spark of mischief in him that I found both intimidating and captivating. He had his own problems at home. Not that he ever talked about them much, but you could tell. He wore that same look of exhaustion and resentment that I did. Like the world had already chewed him up and spit him out before he even got a chance to grow up. He wasn't a troublemaker in the traditional sense, but you could tell he wasn't interested in following the rules. I guess that's what drew me to him. He had this I don't care attitude that I envied. James, on the other hand, was the brainiac. Quiet, a bit awkward, but smart as hell. He had a way of figuring things out, especially when it came to anything involving numbers or tech. The three of us started hanging out in 7th grade, bonding over our shared frustration with life. They became my escape from the storm at home. Instead of dreading the end of school, I started looking forward to it because I knew I'd be hanging out with Noah and James after. We weren't exactly the most innocent trio. By the time we hit high school, we were scheming. It started small, selling candy and trinkets to the other kids to make some cash. We'd buy chocolate in bulk, slap some fancy wrappers on them, and sell them as exclusive imports at ridiculous markups. People bought into it. It was harmless at first, and we'd laugh about how gullible everyone was. It was all just a way to save up for college. None of us came from families with money, and we weren't about to rely on scholarships or student loans to get us through. We needed cash, and we were willing to get creative. By junior year, we built a pretty steady business at school. It wasn't just candy anymore. We were selling everything from cheap jewelry to knockoff electronics. We even had an online store. James, with his tech skills, set it up so we could ship orders discreetly from home. Noah handled the in-person deals. I guess you could say I was the operations manager, though I didn't call it that at the time. We were just three kids trying to hustle. Our little operation caught the attention of some shady characters at school, though. One guy, a senior named Kyle, wanted in on the action. He was a real piece of work. Slick, manipulative, the kind of guy who could charm his way into anything. He saw what we were doing and wanted to expand it into something bigger, more illegal. He suggested we start selling fake IDs, maybe even some stolen goods. Noah was all for it, of course. James hesitated, and I flat out refused. Kyle didn't take no for an answer. He started harassing us, threatening to rat us out if we didn't let him in on our business. It was a stressful few weeks, trying to balance school and avoiding Kyle. We knew if he went to the principal or, worse, the cops, we'd be screwed. But we couldn't let him take control either. That's when Noah came up with an idea: blackmail. James hacked into Kyle's social media accounts and found some, let's say, compromising conversations. Turns out, Kyle was dealing drugs on the side, something he kept well hidden from most people. We gave him an ultimatum: back off, or we'd blow his whole operation wide open. He folded pretty quickly after that. But that incident planted a seed in us. It made us realize that with the right leverage, we could control more than just our little candy-selling gig. By the time we graduated high school, we had a decent amount of money saved up. Our families weren't proud of us, of course. My parents had no idea what I was up to. They didn't care enough to ask. They just assumed I was up to no good and left me alone, which was fine by me. We all got into the same university, though we went for different majors. I studied finance, which, given my background, was a natural choice. Noah went into marketing, and James, of course, chose computer science. We thought university would be a fresh start, a chance to leave the shady high school antics behind and focus on building legitimate futures. But old habits die hard. The first few months of college were tough. None of us had a lot of money, and we were constantly worried about making ends meet. Noah's rebellious streak was still there, and he started looking for ways to make quick cash. He stumbled onto the world of online financial scams, phishing schemes, fake e-commerce sites, identity theft. It was a dark rabbit hole, and we all got sucked in. At first, it was small stuff. Noah would set up fake websites, and we'd trick people into giving us their credit card information. James handled the tech side, making sure everything was untraceable. I dealt with the financial transactions, laundering the money through a series of accounts we'd set up under fake names. We were careful, really careful. It wasn't about getting rich quick. We were in it for the long game, knowing that we had to play it smart if we wanted to avoid getting caught. Things escalated, though, as they always do. We got greedy. We started targeting bigger fish, people with more money to lose. We'd pose as charity organizations, sending out mass emails asking for donations. The money poured in. It was insane. We felt untouchable, but we weren't. The first real shock came when we accidentally scammed a cop. It was a routine phishing attack, nothing fancy, but the guy we targeted happened to be a local detective. He caught on pretty quickly and started sniffing around. We panicked. James managed to erase all traces of our activity before the detective could find anything, but it was close, too close. After that, we laid low for a while, trying to focus on our studies. But the allure of easy money was hard to resist. Then, something even worse happened. One night, we were all hanging out in Noah's dorm room, going over our latest earnings, when we heard a knock at the door. Noah opened it, and there stood Kyle, the guy we'd blackmailed back in high school. He looked rough, like life had chewed him up and spit him out. Turns out, he dropped out of college and had been bouncing from job to job, never really finding his footing. He'd heard through the grapevine that we were running scams and wanted in. We were idiots. We should have told him to get lost. Instead, Noah, being the impulsive guy he was, let him in. Kyle joined our operation, and things went downhill fast. He was reckless, always pushing us to take bigger risks. One day, he came to us with this insane idea, stealing people's identities and taking out loans in their names. It was a step too far, even for us, but Kyle was relentless. Against our better judgment, we went along with it. We created fake identities, applied for loans, and got approved for tens of thousands of dollars. It was a rush, seeing the money roll in, but the whole thing was a ticking time bomb. One mistake, and we'd be done for. And then, that mistake happened. It wasn't even something major, just a small oversight. An IP address we forgot to mask, a careless transaction that left a digital footprint. The authorities started closing in, and we knew it was only a matter of time before they caught up to us. One night, while we were scrambling to cover our tracks, Kyle disappeared. He'd taken a huge chunk of the money and vanished without a trace. We were left to deal with the fallout. James managed to wipe most of our online presence, but the damage was done. The police were investigating, and we were all under suspicion. Noah wanted to run, leave everything behind and start fresh somewhere else. But James and I weren't ready to give up yet. We still had hope that we could fix things, that we could somehow outsmart the authorities. But deep down, I knew we were screwed, and all I could think about was how the hell I'd ended up here. From a miserable childhood, trying to escape my parents' hatred, to running scams with my best friends, always looking over my shoulder, waiting for it all to come crashing down. Update. After Kyle took off with a chunk of the money, Noah and I were left scrambling. We didn't trust anyone, especially after Kyle's betrayal, so we kept a low profile. James was practically living in his room, trying to wipe every trace of our online activities. I had never seen him so stressed. His normally calm, methodical demeanor was gone. He was scared, and for good reason. He knew the kind of digital footprint we'd left behind. The problem with running shady online scams is that, no matter how careful you are, there's always something you forget. One mistake can unravel everything. While we were dealing with our mess, we met someone new, Jenna. Jenna was this smart, no-nonsense girl we ran into at a campus party. She wasn't your typical college student. She had a sharp edge to her, like someone who'd seen way more of the world than her age suggested. At first, we weren't sure if we could trust her, but she quickly proved she was cut from the same cloth as us. Jenna had a talent for manipulation. She could talk her way into or out of anything, and she had connections. I'm not sure how she knew some of the people she did, but they were the kind of people you didn't ask too many questions about. One night, after a particularly tense meeting about how to cover our tracks, Noah invited Jenna over to help us figure out a way out of the mess. She listened to everything and said, "You're thinking too small. If you want to fix this, you've got to go bigger. Bigger risks, bigger rewards." Her confidence was almost unsettling, but we were desperate. She laid out a plan that made my head spin. Jenna wanted us to target major corporations, hack into their systems, and sell their data on the dark web. It was a completely different level from the scams we've been running. James was hesitant. He'd been through enough stress already, and the thought of taking on multi-million-dollar companies terrified him. But Noah, of course, loved the idea. He was always chasing that next big high, and this was his chance. Against our better judgment, we agreed to go along with Jenna's plan. Things moved fast after that. Jenna brought in a couple of people she knew, Aiden and Chloe. Aiden was this quiet, intense guy who rarely spoke but had some serious skills when it came to hacking. Chloe, on the other hand, was a smooth-talking mastermind. She could charm anyone, and her specialty was social engineering, convincing people to give her access to things they shouldn't. Together, we formed this weird, dysfunctional team. It felt like we were assembling a group for some kind of heist movie, but this was real life, and we were way over our heads. The first company we targeted was a medium-sized tech firm. It wasn't a big name, but they had valuable data, client information, financials, everything. Aiden and James worked together to hack into their system, while Chloe sweet-talked a few low-level employees into giving her access to sensitive areas of their internal network. Within a few days, we had everything we needed. Jenna found buyers on the dark web, and just like that, we were making more money than I'd ever seen in my life. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. But with more money came more problems. Jenna was relentless, pushing us to keep going, to target bigger and bigger companies. She had this insatiable hunger for power, and it was starting to freak me out. I could tell James was reaching his breaking point too. He stopped talking to us outside of business, holed up in his room most of the time. Noah, though, was fully on board. He and Jenna started spending a lot more time together, and I couldn't help but feel like I was being edged out of my own group. That's when things started getting out of control. We'd been riding high on the success of our hacks when Noah came to me with some bad news. Apparently, Aiden had gotten sloppy. He'd left behind a traceable digital fingerprint during one of our hacks, and now the authorities were onto us. It wasn't a full-scale investigation yet, but it was only a matter of time. Jenna was furious. She blamed Aiden, of course, but instead of cutting him loose, she did something that shocked all of us. She blackmailed him. She found out that Aiden had been involved in some even darker stuff none of us knew about, and threatened to expose him unless he kept working for us. Aiden, clearly scared, had no choice but to comply. But the tension in the group was palpable. No one trusted anyone anymore, and we were all just waiting for the other shoe to drop. The final straw came during one of our biggest jobs. Jenna had set her sights on a major financial institution, one that had layers of security far beyond anything we dealt with before. James was on edge, warning that this was too big, too risky, but Jenna didn't care. She wanted the money, and she didn't care who got hurt along the way. We'd been working on the hack for weeks when disaster struck. Chloe had managed to get inside information from one of the bank's executives, but the guy got suspicious and started asking too many questions. Chloe, being the manipulative person she was, tried to string him along, but it didn't work. He reported her to the authorities, and before we knew it, the feds were breathing down our necks. It was only a matter of time before they found out everything. We tried to go dark, to disappear before they could connect the dots, but it was too late. One night, while I was lying in bed, my phone buzzed. It was a message from James. "They're here." My heart stopped. I jumped out of bed and raced to his dorm, but when I got there, it was too late. The FBI was swarming the building. I saw them lead James out in handcuffs. He looked at me, and the guilt in his eyes was unmistakable. I don't know how, but they had found us. I ran. I didn't know what else to do. I grabbed what little cash I had stashed away and left town. I didn't tell Noah or Jenna. I didn't care anymore. I just needed to get out before they caught me too. For a few weeks, I lived in this weird state of limbo, always looking over my shoulder, waiting for the inevitable knock on the door. I didn't know where Noah or Jenna were, and I didn't care. I was done with them. But as it turns out, running isn't as easy as it looks. The FBI found me eventually. I wasn't as careful as I should have been. One morning, I woke up to the sound of my door being kicked in. They had me in cuffs before I could even process what was happening. I remember the cold, sterile room they brought me to. The endless questions, the accusations. They had everything: emails, transaction records, chat logs, everything. I was screwed. It was during those long, agonizing interrogation sessions that I found out what had happened to the others. James had cut a deal, agreeing to testify against the rest of us in exchange for a lighter sentence. I can't blame him. He'd always been the least involved in the scams, and he was terrified of going to prison. Aiden had disappeared. No one knew where he was, and honestly, I wasn't surprised. Chloe had been arrested the same night as James. Jenna and Noah, though, they were still out there, somewhere. The trial was a blur. I was sentenced to a few years in federal prison for my role in the scams. It could have been worse, I guess. The judge said I was young, made bad decisions, but still had a chance to turn my life around. I don't know if that's true, but I guess I'll find out. Prison wasn't as bad as I expected, but it wasn't great either. I kept my head down, avoided trouble, and just counted down the days until I could get out. The worst part wasn't being locked up. It was knowing that I'd ruined my life before it even really started. All the money we'd made was gone, seized by the authorities, and I had nothing to show for it. But that wasn't the end. A few months before I was set to be released, I got a letter. It was from Jenna. I hadn't heard from her since everything went down, and I figured she'd vanished for good. But apparently, she'd managed to stay off the grid. The letter was cryptic, full of vague references to new opportunities and unfinished business. She wanted me to join her, to pick up where we left off. For a split second, I considered it. Jenna had always been a master manipulator, and part of me still craved the thrill of those early days, the rush of pulling off a successful scam. But then I remembered where I was, the cold steel bars that separated me from the outside world, and I realized that I couldn't do it. I was done. Jenna was on her own. I burned the letter. When I got out of prison, I tried to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy. Employers don't exactly jump at the chance to hire a convicted felon, especially one with a history of internet fraud. But I kept my head down, found odd jobs here and there, and slowly started piecing things back together. I haven't heard from Noah since the trial. Last I heard, he was living in some far-off country under a fake name, still running scams. I don't know what happened to Jenna, and I don't care to find out. James served his time, too, and he's trying to make things right. We don't talk much, but I don't hold any grudges against him. We all made our choices, and now we're living with the consequences. Sometimes, late at night, I think about what could have been. If I just walked away when we started selling candy in high school, if I kept my nose clean and gone to college like a normal person, maybe things would have turned out differently. But there's no point in dwelling on it. What's done is done. I'm not looking for sympathy or advice. I just needed to get this off my chest. Maybe someone out there will read this and think twice before they go down the same path I did. Or maybe not. Either way, I'm done with that life. It's time to move on. Final update. After getting out of prison, I spent a lot of time trying to lay low, rebuild, and, just stay out of trouble. Finding work was almost impossible. I worked a few construction gigs, odd jobs that didn't ask too many questions about my background. Still, even as I tried to move forward, The past wouldn't let me go. Everywhere I turned, I felt like there were eyes on me. People from my old life, people who knew too much. At first, I thought I was just paranoid. Prison messes with your head, makes you see threats where there aren't any. But then weird things started happening. It started with small stuff. I'd come home to my shitty little apartment and notice things were slightly off. An open window that I was sure I'd closed, or a drawer that seemed to have been rummaged through. I shrugged it off at first, thinking maybe I was just being forgetful or jumpy. But then it escalated. I began getting phone calls from unknown numbers, dead air on the other end. I blocked the numbers, but new ones kept popping up. Emails too, cryptic messages from burner accounts, saying things like, "We haven't forgotten," or "It's not over." It was only a matter of time before the other shoe dropped. One night, I was walking home from work when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, but no one was there. The city was crowded, full of noise and distractions, but something about that moment felt off. The footsteps stopped when I stopped, and they started again as soon as I moved. I sped up, weaving through the crowded streets, trying to lose whoever was tailing me. When I finally made it home, I locked the door behind me and checked every window, every closet. Nothing, just silence. But the feeling of being watched? It never left. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. It was handwritten, just 2 words, "He's back." I knew immediately who he was. Kyle. I hadn't thought about him much since prison. The guy had disappeared before everything went down, and part of me hoped he'd stay gone. But deep down, I always knew he'd resurface. Kyle wasn't the type to let things go, and he sure as hell wasn't the type to forgive. I spent the next few days on edge, jumping at every sound, waiting for Kyle to make his move. And then, one evening, it happened. There was a knock at my door, 3 short, sharp knocks. I knew it wasn't anyone I wanted to see, but I opened the door anyway. And there he was. Kyle. He looked different. Older. Rougher. Like life had beaten him down in the same way it had me. But that dangerous glint in his eyes was still there. "Miss me?" he asked, leaning casually against the doorframe, as if we were old friends catching up after a long time apart. I didn't invite him in, but he pushed past me and made himself comfortable on the couch. My heart was racing, but I kept my face neutral. I didn't want him to know how scared I was. He wasted no time getting to the point. "You owe me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You and Noah both. You thought you could just cut me out, run off with all the cash? Think again." I didn't have to ask what he was talking about. The money from our last scam. The one Kyle had stolen a chunk of before disappearing. It was long gone. I didn't have a cent of it left. I tried to explain, but Kyle wasn't interested in excuses. He had a plan, and like it or not, I was a part of it. He wanted to run another job, bigger than anything we'd ever done. And this time, there was no backing out. Kyle made it clear that if I didn't cooperate, I'd end up in a worse place than prison. He had connections now, people who owed him favors, people who could make me disappear without a trace. I believed him. Over the next few weeks, I was dragged back into the world I tried so hard to leave behind. Kyle's plan was insane. He wanted to target a government agency, hack into their systems, and sell classified information to the highest bidder. It was a suicide mission, but Kyle was confident. He'd already roped in a few other people. Some tech genius named Max, who made James look like an amateur, and a woman named Bella, who handled the social engineering side of things. Max was a cold, calculating guy. He barely spoke, but when he did, it was always about how much money we stood to make. Bella, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. Smooth, charming, and eerily good at getting people to trust her. I hated being around them, but I had no choice. We were in too deep. The job started off smoothly. Bella infiltrated the agency, posing as an intern, and Max was working on bypassing the security systems. But something didn't sit right with me. This job was too risky, too complicated. It felt like we were walking into a trap. And I was right. Just when we thought we were about to pull it off, everything went to hell. One of the agency's cybersecurity specialists caught onto Max's activity. Within hours, the entire operation was compromised. Sirens blared as FBI agents stormed the warehouse where we were working. It was chaos. Kyle and Max tried to make a run for it, but they didn't get far. Bella disappeared into the shadows, leaving me behind as the agents closed in. I thought it was the end. I was going back to prison, and this time, there'd be no getting out. But then something unexpected happened. One of the agents pulled me aside. He wasn't like the others. He didn't seem interested in arresting me. Instead, he offered me a deal. It turns out, they'd been watching Kyle for months, and they wanted to bring down his entire operation. If I cooperated, if I helped them take Kyle down, they'd cut me loose. No charges, no prison time. It was an impossible choice. I hated Kyle, but the idea of being a rat, of turning on someone I once called a friend, made my stomach turn. But what choice did I have? If I didn't take the deal, I'd be rotting in a cell for the rest of my life. I agreed. The next few weeks were a blur of surveillance, wiretaps, and undercover operations. I fed the FBI everything I knew about Kyle and his network. It felt like I was living in a movie, constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if Kyle would find out and have me killed. But in the end, it worked. The feds arrested Kyle, Max, and several others in one of the biggest cybercrime busts in years. Bella vanished without a trace, and no one's seen her since. Kyle went down hard. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Max got a hefty sentence too, though not as severe. As for me, the FBI kept their word. They erased any record of my involvement and let me go. I was free, really free this time. But freedom isn't what I thought it would be. Even though I'm not behind bars, I still feel trapped. The ghosts of my past haunt me every day. I can't walk down the street without wondering if someone's watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. I can't sleep without nightmares of Kyle coming back for revenge. And I can't shake the feeling that no matter how far I run, I'll never truly escape the consequences of my actions. James reached out to me a few months after Kyle's arrest. He's doing okay, I guess. He's working a boring IT job, keeping his head down, trying to stay out of trouble. We talked for a while, reminiscing about the old days, but it wasn't the same. We're different people now. Too much has happened. He's moving on, and I'm happy for him. But I don't think I'll ever be able to do the same. I thought about leaving the country, starting fresh somewhere far away where no one knows who I am or what I've done. But I don't have the money, and I don't have the energy. I'm tired of running, tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of the endless cycle of mistakes and consequences. So here I am, posting on Reddit, trying to make sense of it all. I don't know what the future holds for me. Maybe I'll disappear into obscurity, live out the rest of my days in anonymity. Or maybe the past will catch up with me again, and I'll end up right back where I started. I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's no escaping your choices. No matter how far you run, they'll always catch up with you in the end. I made a lot of mistakes, and I've paid for them, but the cost is higher than I ever imagined. I'm not looking for sympathy or advice. I know I brought this on myself. I just needed to get it all out there, to put it into words and try to make sense of it. Maybe by writing it down, I can finally start to move on. Or maybe not. Only time will tell.